On my travels, I confirmed that which I've always believed. That we have the power to take away pain.
We ask you, what makes a good villain? Is it their keen intellect? Is it their charisma and cunning? Or is it their swagger? Perhaps it's a little bit of all of the above. If you ask us at Chrisbkingdom, the best villains are the ones that we can't so easily call villainous. Sometimes there are villains whose circumstances shape their morally questionable actions in such a way that makes us question whether we hate them in the first place. When we first see Isadora, we see a poor little girl trying to get water for her sickly little brother. Little would anyone know this little girl would grow up to want to save the world by easing the suffering of all. Her research certainly showed great promise in doing just that. Such a noble and innocent pursuit, right? At least that was her intentions. But don't they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions? It was with one good deed that all of the terrible events from an age lost to wizarding history unfolded. This is the story of the Anti-Keeper, Isidora Morganach explained. Before we go into the explanation, if you like what we do here and want to support the channel, please hit the subscribe button and the bell icon with your best cast Flipendo spell to never miss when a new video drops. You can always unsubscribe later if you feel we've lost our touch. And don't forget to share and comment on the video even if it's just an emoji. It lets us know that you're here. So without further ado, let's begin. The object lesson of the Keeper's memories. How was Isadora introduced to the story? Now this might come as a surprise to you who haven't played the game yet, but Isadora was not introduced to the story as some crazed, maniacally laughing, stereotype monologuing her wicked plan. She was just a normal little girl living with her kind father and lame little brother in a drought-scorched Feldcroft where life was hard. The drought made growing crops and having enough clean drinking water for the livestock and population of the small hamlet almost unsustainable. The town's well was completely dry, and all hope was lost, at least until a miracle happened. Seemingly out of nowhere, it started to rain. It was as if by some divine providence that the sky had opened and poured down a second chance at life for the inhabitants of the hamlet below. The dry and cracked earth grew back its greenery, flowers blossomed, and trees turned from brown and dead to green and healthy, all done in mere minutes. Now what is interesting is that Feldcroft is a wizarding settlement. What do you think, they could have done something about their own problem? Couldn't they just have used their own magic to ease the burden? I would say the answer to that question is yes and no. Two spells that come to my mind that feature water and flora are the two charms Herbivicus and Aguamenti. For instance, Herbivicus only makes plants grow faster, such as from a sapling or seed, meaning it just speeds up the plant's natural growing process. The spell cannot make dead plants come back to life, so in a drought with lots of dead grasslands and trees, the spell would be quite useless. Aguamenti, on the other hand, can conjure clean drinking water. For example, Harry Potter tried casting Aguamenti to make drinking water for Dumbledore after he had been weakened by the potion he drank from the basin inside the cave during their hunt for one of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes. So it is a wonder why no one tried using Aguamenti to produce water for the crops and for the population at large. I think the short answer to that question is that while the Aguamenti charm could be used to ease some of the burden that the drought brought upon the land, it would just be a band-aid on the problem, but not a real viable solution to it. As it turns out, the solution would be something with the ability to shape the natural world itself. The Keepers had saved the people of Feldcroft with magic never seen before about a modern wizarding world, and by doing so set the stage for the magical development of one who would become their greatest student, but also their greatest ideological opposition. This one good deed would be the very thing that inspired the development of Isadora's philosophy towards the use of her magic. She wanted to save the world by easing the burden of pain and sorrow on everyone she came to know and love. The magic that had saved her and her home could also be used to save others. Now I know what you're thinking, wouldn't that make her a hero rather than a villain? I think it is fair to say the philosophy and actions of Isidora Morganach were more complicated than what the labels good or bad could do justice, as we will explain later in the video. But what we can say is throughout it all, she remained eternally grateful to the Keepers for their kindness at having saved her and her home. She was, of course, the only person who had really seen what happened that day. The mysterious swirls were real. The secret organization and Isadora's gift. Isadora would later attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where she would be sorted into Ravenclaw House like the then head mistress of Hogwarts, Neem Fitzgerald. For reasons unknown, Isadora was late to start Hogwarts, as she, just like Professor Rackham, started school in her 5th year rather than her 1st year as most students do. The rarity of this is quickly acknowledged by Rackham himself during the special meeting he and his colleagues invited Isadora to. Isadora was a very good and bright student and quickly adjusted to her classes and life at Hogwarts, despite the disadvantage of having to play catch up on all of the information that years 1 through 4 would have prepared her for before she started her 5th year. It turns out that the meeting was called because of the prior conversation Rookwood had with Isadora about the beautiful swirls that she had seen during the Keeper's intervention at Feldcroft. Rookwood knew this meant that they had found in Isidora another who could perceive ancient magic and wanted to bring her into the fold as one of the select few who could be trusted with the knowledge that their organization existed to guard. By the way, if you missed our video on the Keepers, I suggest you go and check it out in our Hogwarts Legacy playlist when you finish this video. I will also leave a link to it in the descriptions of this video. Anyway, after Rookwood reveals the reason Isidora was called to the meeting with them was to confirm that the beautiful swirls of magic that she had seen as a small child were real, Isidora goes on to tell them that she had recognized them all right away, but never told them that she had seen what they had done for her in her home so many years ago, at least until now. When Isidora had told her father what she had seen that day, he dismissed it as just her imagination running wild. Rackham then reiterated that what she saw was real, and that he too can see the same phenomena. Until that moment, they had never come across anyone else who could see what Rackham could. So he goes on to explain to Isidora that what they are seeing is the physical traces that appear when a particular form of ancient magic is wielded. Very few wizards or witches can wield this form of magic, as noted by Professor Bakar. Isidora is one of the few, since she has shown the ability to see ancient magic like Professor Rackham, who agrees to train her on how to properly wield ancient magic, at least on the condition that she learns everything else that Hogwarts has to teach her. She leaves the meeting delighted at the prospect of being one of the few that can wield something so amazing, and of course she is commanded not to tell anyone else what was discussed between them. A broken heart and the power to mend it all. How Isidora came to drift away from the ideology and guidance of her mentors. Isidora was the kind of student that put her all into anything she tried, which had its rewards and advantages, but there was also one glaring disadvantage to this as well. She was quite sensitive towards the suffering of others. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing on its head, but it can be damaging when taken too far. For instance, in medicine, we have many examples of this. I won't go into the details in this video, but there is a reason why we have so many review boards and regulations surrounding human research as we do. Shout out to Dr. Kuvokian. Anyway, during one of her lessons with Rackham, she demonstrates that she has quickly developed a knack for using ancient magic and earns high praise from Rackham for her proficiency. He notices that something is troubling her. She tells him that her father isn't getting any better and hasn't spoken since the passing of her little brother. Her father is absent and hollow in his despair and quite literally grieving himself to death. In his current state, she doesn't believe he will ever get over the death of her little brother. Isidora is the only one he has left to care for him, so she desperately wants to bring peace to her father and ease his depression. This is the first example we get about what Isidora wants to do with her power. She divulges to Rackham her innermost thoughts on the possibilities of using her power to ease her father's suffering if possible. She wants nothing more than to take away the pain and sorrow of others, and this would go on to define her research and mission as an ancient magic user. Rackham, on the other hand, while acknowledging the temptation there is at the prospect of using ancient magic to transfigure much more than the physical world, but he warns her against it as he believes that human emotion was too complex a force to be meddled with even by the most skilled sorcerers. Isidora took this as him saying that she is to just let her father's pain destroy him as she does nothing. So seeing that they were not going to see eye to eye on the subject, Isidora ends the lesson by walking away, clearly frustrated by Rackham's advice. This is the first of many ideological differences that would arise between the Keepers and Isidora. I think it is safe to say Isidora, though frustrated with her mentors right now, would work to try to change their minds by showing the benefits of her future research into the use of ancient magic on living subjects. And she had done just that during the time she was away, as she had devoted countless hours towards her research. Years after the disagreement between Isidora and Rackham, she would be greeted back to Hogwarts by her former mentors as no longer a student, but the esteemed Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Excited to hear about what Isidora had been up to on her travels before accepting the position as the new Hogwarts professor, Rackham offers her a seat. Rather than tell them what she had been doing, she would show them, so she invites Rackham and the rest of her colleagues to her home to demonstrate her findings. Upon the arrival of her colleagues, she excitedly opens the door before Rookwood can even knock, as if she knew already that they were out there. She excitedly invites them in and introduces them to her father. Her research had bore fruit and confirmed that which she had always believed was possible. Users of ancient magic can remove the negative emotions of others, be it pain, sorrow, anger, you name it. Pain can be removed, but it must be contained in another vessel. Isidora demonstrates the fruits of her research by removing the pain from her father and placing the negative emotions she took from him into a jar. Her actions were met with interest and curiosity on the part of some of the Keepers, but with criticism and doubt from Rackham, who worried what the long-term effects of what Isidora had done would entail, and he tells the others that he had never seen anything like the traces of magic that Isidora now held in her hand. But what was sure is that in that instance, her father felt so much better and thanked his daughter gratefully. Where did Isidora's travels take her, and what does her journal entries tell us about the experiences that shaped her research? As we progress through the game and complete the trials laid out by the Keepers, which lead us to explore all the villages and towns surrounding Hogwarts, we find the secret places where Isidora had used as her basis of operation. The cellar of her home in Feldcroft, the overlooked mines, and the tower tunnels located in Merrimweem were her main and most guarded places of interest. Isidora traveled all over the surrounding lands and territories, so many of the places she had conducted her research had been destroyed by the Keepers themselves on the campaign to destroy all knowledge of the events that took place between themselves and Isidora. But little did they know that Isidora was just as clever as they were and knew how to keep secrets well, including from them. This was especially made apparent as she understood that if she wanted to save others, she would have to operate on her own terms since the Keepers would not cooperate with her mission. While Isidora respected their opinions, she could not shake the guilt she felt at observing mass suffering and having the power to do something about it, but compelled by her mentors not to intervene. We find 2 entries from Isidora's personal journal in the cellar of the ruins of her old home in Feldcroft, which conveniently has an ancient magic-made entrance to the Undercroft. This is similar to how at the end of every one of the Keepers' trials there is an ancient magic-made portal leading back to the map chamber. According to her first journal entry, sometime after Isidora halted her training with Rackham, she had gone to study and help out at a camp for plague victims. Isidora lived during the Tudor period of Europe, which saw great social upheaval with war and disease rampant. The plague had ravaged the population, creating lots of death and suffering all around for both muggles and wizard kind alike. She could do nothing for the dead, so her concern was for the survivors of the plague and the sorrow they felt after the loss of their loved ones.
It is my 2nd week in the camp. More arrive each day. The Muggle doctors and even some of our own healers are doing all that they can for them. The grief is palpable. The ones who have survived the plague are forever damaged by their loss. A fever may pass, the skin may mend and scar, but the devastating sorrow remains. I saw a man, much like my father, who had lost a child. I couldn't bear it. I longed to give him some shred of relief. I'm beginning to think that the others are wrong. I have the power to help these souls. It seems as arbitrary not to help them as it would to rid them of their torment. I traveled here to learn, but I long to help. My internal struggle is overwhelming. It's as though the magic wants to heal, and I am the one preventing it from doing so. Should I lose hope? Will I forever regret not having done more? I cannot look into their eyes, knowing that I could lessen the burden of heartache. I saw the man leaving camp today, the one who so reminded me of my father. Surely it wouldn't hurt to help him. I could further my research, of course, but that would be a fortuitous consequence of doing something good with this ability.
The man mentioned in Isidora's writings who had lost his child to the plague was the first of many she would attempt to remove pain from. Although the spell seems to have had unintended effects on her as well, since she mentioned in her 3rd entry how her first attempt had knocked her unconscious.
The world floated back to me as if in a watery haze. How long had I been unconscious? I only remember his eyes. Empty. Empty of sorrow, yes, but also I recall feeling a sense of euphoria as I watched the pain vanish. But then everything started to turn. When I fell, I must have hit my head. I neither feel nor see a mark, but the pain is throbbing. I can only hope it is not the Black Death. At least he is no longer in pain.
Could it be that what she had siphoned from this man was not just his emotional pain, but the very essence that made him who he was? She says the man's eyes were void of sorrow, but never goes on to say what else the man's eyes were empty of. This is quite cryptic, as it suggests that she knew that her magic had not only worked to remove pain, but also removed everything else from the man's personality. Maybe she wrote this off as a necessary sacrifice for the sake of research. So perhaps there may be others who may not experience the same effects as this poor man. At the very least, his pain was gone, and that was enough to satisfy Isidora. Although it is unclear as to whatever became of the man mentioned in her first 2 journal entries, it is safe to say she would go on to continue her research and would score a real breakthrough by her 4th journal entry.
I have had a breakthrough. The power that I honed with my professors, with which I conjured and built such pretty pillars, must be tempered substantially for the much more delicate endeavor which I now undertake. It feels somewhat like removing a memory, but the magic is wholly different. As I withdrew the merest whisper of pain from just above the heart, a faint haze appeared, and then just as quickly seemed to dissipate. I sensed a surge of peace myself, as though I knew instantly that what I was doing was right. I wonder now if the haze may be contained. If memories can be stored in a pensieve, surely these extractions can be kept safe for further study.
Isadora found that she could use the same power she had honed to make pretty pillars to remove pain from people, but she needed to be much more delicate with it as to not cause harm, and since it felt like removing memories from someone, she thought up the idea of containing the extractions for further study. For this endeavor, she called upon the aid of her goblin acquaintance Bragbor the Boastful, who was one of the most skilled goblin metal craftsmen of the age. Isadora had been looking for suitable vessels to contain the leftover wisps of magic that she could not readily take into herself. For this, she would need something much bigger.
I feel more and more capable each day. My sense of purpose, knowing that what I am doing is precisely what I was meant to do, has never been clearer. The number of souls I have been able to help grows by the day. So much pain. And I discovered that this magic itself somehow confirms that what I am doing is right. Each time I breathe in the haze, even a little, it's as though I become more capable. I am being rewarded for my courage, rewarded for using this magic the way that it was meant to be used. I fear, however, that I must find a way to store what I cannot use in the moment. I do not yet understand its power and do not want to leave it to chance. I have an idea. It is not without risk, but I feel that the risk is worth it.
Bragbor would go on to build the repositories that Isadora used to store all of the leftover magic she extracted from others. This was of course supposed to be a temporary solution until she was able to convince the other keepers of the benefits of this magic.
Isadora, what you did for your father was remarkable.
Well, wasn't it? And Percival needn't worry about the strands of emotion or the traces that this magic leaves. I found a way to contain all of it.
You haven't stopped.
Goblin Silver.
You spoke to a goblin about this.
Don't worry, he has no idea what we're containing.
We don't know what effect any of this may have. The emotions, the dark traits.
You sound like Percival. And as it happens, I do know. It is a source of strength, of focus. Somehow it enhances my ability to wield magic.
I don't follow, Isadora.
I think we can harness it.
Power like this is not to be toyed with. In the wrong
You
hands,
saw what I did for my father. Oh, Neve, imagine the good we could do. Everyone is in some kind of pain.
What are you doing?
Breathe it in. Can you feel it?
Oh, Isadora. This must stop. All of it.
You've kept this power to yourselves for so long because you fear it. I choose to embrace it.
After things don't turn out as well as she had hoped during her private conversation with Headmistress Neem, Isadora left with a new sense of purpose towards her goal. She had been working alone all this time, and she would continue if the others could not see reason. Isadora Vs The Keepers, a tale of power and ideology, whose legacy shall prevail into the future. We all have disagreements with others, and sometimes they can be terrible. During such disagreements, good friends and colleagues can become the bitterest of enemies. This is quite true for Isadora and her former mentors, the Keepers. Isadora tries desperately to convince them of the validity of her work and how beneficial it could be for the greater good of the world if only they could cooperate. And the Keepers in turn try to convince her that the power that they hold is far too dangerous and would be best kept away from the world lest it fall into the wrong hands.
How could I have been so terribly wrong? The headmistress won't help me. I tried to make her understand. She, like the others, is blind to the possibilities of what I can do. I have come to learn that I can rely on no one, but I am a more powerful witch than I have ever been. And I know that it's due to the work I'm doing. I shall not allow my magic to lie dormant, as the Keepers do. How I despise that ridiculous name. As it keeping power all to themselves is something to be lauded. I confess, I have begun to wonder if I will ever find another in my lifetime with whom I can share this work. If I do not, then I shall find solace in the knowledge that I have left them a trail to follow, a path from which they can learn. Perhaps they will do what I cannot, heal the world.
After Headmistress Neem rebuffed Isadora's offer to use the power she had been harnessing to enhance her own power, Isadora left fully convinced that they all now shared irreconcilable differences in ideology and purpose. The Keepers choose to hide their powers away, but Isadora chooses to embrace hers. The more power she extracts from others and consumes for herself, the more powerful she becomes. Things continue to sour between the Keepers and Isadora as the months go on, as she has continued to siphon the negative emotions of others, only this time she seems to have lost all restraint. When son Bakar visits her home in Feldcroft, he gets the shock of his life when he finds her father sitting at the table unresponsive, his eyes completely pale and lifeless. He was like a living husk with no soul left in the body, just like the poor man Isadora first tried her experiment on, only this time she doesn't seem to care about the outcome, only that their pain is gone. At least that was her excuse. The incident at Isadora's home with her father unnerves Bakar so greatly that he rushes back to Hogwarts to inform Rackham, who has learned Isadora has been taking students down to the repository she had built in the catacombs under Hogwarts and had been extracting their pain as well. Now that the students were involved, the Keepers finally decided that it was time to confront Isadora and stop her once and for all. As she walks from behind the repository, she encourages the Keepers to breathe deeply of the power that radiates from the repository and fully embrace it. Isadora seemed to be drunk on the euphoria that breathing in the negative of magic gave her, as she was ordered by Rackham to place down her wand. She refused and declared that no one would suffer again. And Rackham used the disarming spell only for Isadora to knock it away and counter with a blast that sent them all flying. This starts the duel between Isadora and the Keepers to decide the fate of ancient magic. Would it be kept a secret or embraced and used? It all rested on this one duel. As Isadora with her greatly enhanced powers started to overwhelm both Rookwood and Rackham, son Bakar ends the duel abruptly by hitting Isadora with the killing curse. Isadora may have met her end at the bottom of Hogwarts in the catacombs, but her power and ideology lived on in spite of the efforts of the Keepers to hide it all away. Isadora had given up trying to find someone in her lifetime to help her, so she laid the groundwork to guide someone like herself that would do what she could not. Isadora will forever be the anti-keeper, and an example of how far one could go when their will is set free. Be it for good or be it for bad, you decide. The court's conclusion. And that does it for our video, guys. What did you think about Isidora Morganach? She hid away her knowledge and the records of her travels and worked behind cryptic runes and ancient magic just like the Keepers did, all to preserve and pass on her legacy. This is why we at Chrisbkingdom call Isadora the Anti-Keeper. She knew that her former colleagues and mentors did not approve of her methods and would try to stymie them as much as possible to keep the secret of ancient magic just that, a secret. She was right in that regard, as it was the Keepers themselves that destroyed her portrait and what they could find of all records proving her existence, including their own. Or, on the other hand, do you think Isidora Morganach was the good guy? All she wanted to do was embrace her power and use it to remove pain from others, albeit she went a step or two too far. She still wanted to do good in her own way. It could also be said that the Keepers themselves are to blame for how things turned out with Isadora. Wasn't it their good deed that set all this into motion? Maybe they should have just taken their own advice and let the events play out as they would have, and never helped the people of Feldcroft and Isadora's family by extension. After all, as Rackham put it, it's not their pain to take. Isadora admired the Keepers for what they had done for her in her home, but soon became disillusioned by the Keepers' unwillingness to intervene with others suffering like they did for Feldcroft so many years ago. This disillusionment soon turned to scorn, and she started viewing them as selfish, just sitting on power, not using it, watching the suffering of others but not intervening. Was Isadora justified in her thoughts and actions and just went about it in a totally wrong way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. That's all I've got for this one, guys. Have a great one. Be safe out there. Oh, and don't go try saving the world. The Keepers won't like that. The council is dismissed.
Her possession secrets. He won't suffer any longer. Not my father, not my students, no one.
Isadora.